Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. So it's going to be tough for you to guess where I am with tulips
Darn
and
it. If nothing else, it's the tulips that give it away. Forget the windmill there. But
I
let me
think
explain to everyone that we're moving into a new series, so we needed a new background photo. And this is the beginning of spring. And what is more spring than tulips in the Netherlands? And there they are, fields of red tulips there.
I have a family member who lives there, as you know, in Rotterdam. And then I
Right.
also love that country. And I have a very good friend, we do, Eric Jansen, who is from there and has a
Correct.
home there. So, um, but like you, lives in Connecticut most of the time.
Right.
Uh, so, This is about the change in the substance of work, Deirdre. We're seeing that one thing we've been talking about, and we talked at length about, or at least I did in the book that just published ahead of the machine, uh, was about this substance of work for everyone in an organization, and even especially the leaders that you and I see artificial intelligence as a leverage point, an enabler, something that will enable better work and not necessarily better work automatically, but will enable being able to have more scope in what you do, more depth in what you do, if you manage it properly. And we talk about that at length in Ahead of the Machine, and also in many of the videos that we've done. And they're all linked if you end up in the book with the book. But what we'd like to talk about now is a discussion between, again, the board chair of a company and the CEO of a company about this subject. And what is this? How does this manifest itself in a company today if you're running a company? And what does it mean for how you approach this? And so we're going to pick up with a company that we've used in past videos, but with a new CEO, I think.
Right. Um, a housekeeping note or two. As I mentioned, this is a new series. We are now starting our series number 73. And this is video that we're recording right now is video 73-1A. Now, the way we structure our series is that they start with discussions between a board chair and a CEO. Then we have the second part, which is how that CEO makes the decisions to come into that meeting with the board chair. And then in the final part, what we call university, is we discuss some tools that the CEO or anyone else could use to prepare for such discussions. And you're right, Tom, that this is about the substance of work and how the substance of work has changed. But I think I need to mention here that the reason it has changed is the coming of artificial intelligence, the movement of artificial intelligence into the organizations. So we're still going to be talking a lot about artificial intelligence and how you, as leaders, as managers, and whatever position you have now, get a better sense of not only what the AI is doing, but how you can use the AI to change the substance of your work and your company's work, all for the better. So that's what we're doing here in the 73 series. Um,
So, no, please.
Now, in our previous two series, the 71 series and the 72, we had a board chair and a CEO who were discussing bringing the topic of using AI to the board. And the board chair, whom you played, Tom, seemed to know what was going on, even though his interactions with his own board said a lot of the board members just did not understand what this AI was. The CEO, the role I played, turned out to know that there should be something done about this AI, but was frankly pretty darn hapless in terms of organizing her management team, bringing the team to the point where they could use AI, or even being able to think through how to use AI in an organization. So the board has dumped that hapless CEO,
That's
and
a
now,
pretty aggressive term, Deirdre, dumping.
well deserved though, don't you? And remember, Tom, remember the statistics we've brought up from Davos that even though the majority, what is it, 82% of CEOs understand that AI is going to have to be used in their corporations, most of them have no clue how, and over 50% think that their jobs are in jeopardy because they don't know how to use AI. Let's just keep those in mind here. We now have a new CEO who understands this AI stuff, but needs to figure out how this organization will be using AI, getting this information through conversations with the board director. So at this point, Tom, why don't you take over?
Okay. So I will take over. Hello, Deirdre.
Hello, Tom.
So we really appreciate you taking this on. We know you've run a number of companies. You have an expertise in the area of artificial intelligence and running companies, or you've been studying it just like I have. We know you do serve on other boards, and we appreciate you picking up the operating role of this company. We see a great future for this company. Obviously, it's the reason we asked you to step into this role. And we think that with your insight into the use of AI in meaningful ways, in strategic ways, um, it will help us. So, I'm glad you're here. And what I thought we might do is just start out the conversation between us, a conversation that I think every board will go through or perhaps should think hard about putting on their agenda is this very discussion that you and I are going to have, which because I'm having it, we may not do the best job of this. You certainly will do, but who knows about me? Um, we'll go through this though and just talk about it at a high level. We think this is a discussion that is meaningful for companies these days, mostly because, and I'll use the phrase that you've used, and we're going to be incorporating in the next book that we're working on, or I'm working on with your help at the very moment, leading the machine, which
Correct.
is about the point that everyone is now going to need to up their game. We always do talk about every day you have to up your game, but here again, we think it's a significant change because it's going to change the core of what people do. And we've seen this happen in other times, and usually in someone's life, depending on how old they are, they'll go through at least one of these changes. People like you and me will go through a couple of these, right?
Right.
The internet age did it to us first, and then now this age, and mostly because we think the digital age was just the transformation of the internet age into going from analog to digital, which we didn't, it had material and significant effects on everybody, but wasn't a massive change like the pre-internet to internet and then now to the use of learning and reasoning and synthesis capabilities that are brought to the tools. So with that, I'll just let you tell me your thoughts about this, and then we can talk about how you see this, an approach. And what I'd like to do, Deirdre, is I'd love to get your thoughts on if I'm having this discussion cold with you, how would you approach the use of this with the organization so that you get immediate benefit without spending millions of dollars without great risk? How would you go about that task? And I'm not expecting a plan. It's just I'd like to discuss the idea.
Mhm. Well, first of all, let me say, as the new CEO coming in, that I'm very glad for this opportunity. I see a tremendous challenge in front of me. I know that you've had a little stop and start here with the use of AI in the organization, but I believe firmly that the use of AI in the ways that you and I will outline in our conversation is a way to indeed up the game of everyone in the organization and create better results for the organization as a whole. And isn't that what we're in business for here? Now, I understand that there was some training of people in the management team. I get a sense, and perhaps you could confirm this, that there's been little conversation about the use of AI below the management team level. And maybe the first thing that I'd like to do is, in my way, part of my introducing myself to the organization is start series of informal conversations with groups of employees about how they're using AI right now.
Yeah.
My guess is what I'm going to find is that a lot of them, 50% or more, have been using a basic AI model to accomplish some tasks. I hear that, for example, a lot of employees are using ChatGPT for some tasks, but basic tasks like search or like writing a thank you note to grandma or things like that, which, as you and I both know, is vastly underplaying the ability of these models. But there's another reason for starting to interview people is that we do not know as a company right now whether some of these employees are actually using a model, whether ChatGPT or Claude or Grok or whichever of these models, to actually do work for the organization,
Right.
which may be running into quality assurance issues. So I think the first thing that I have to do is to just get my hands around what's happening here. Not in any punitive sense, but in an encouraging sense, but just so that we as an organization start to figure out how we can move forward, even while we're protecting ourselves in terms of alignment of work, cybersecurity, and optimizing our use of AI. Does this sound right to you?
It does. It does. I think I think what what I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen something very similar, is that there's a great deal of when a great deal of the models when they're not used in the for a corporate initiative. Many times, corporate initiatives many times are either standardized on you know the Microsoft platform with Copilot, or you use Google's Gemini or whatever. If you're not doing that, I think a lot of people are probably using ChatGPT. And there's a lot of hype around ChatGPT. And I know they just went through an amazing funding round and so forth. None of that impresses me because I've been into the bowels of ChatGPT and I don't like it, Deirdre.
Right.
I, if you're going to use something, I'd prefer to have people using something that is a little more careful, more trained in a way that is less conformational. From what I look at the way it's trained, it has a high level of confirmation in it, rather than what you and I would look at as trying to stay as clean in the thinking as possible. So I'd like to see for you to get a sense of that, because I think you're going to find, especially in the areas where there's been a lot of work of this, programming, IT support, infrastructure probably is using it. I think you're probably going to find in marketing, more in the external marketing, not in the product marketing. But there are people that are probably using it for project management in some form. But I think you're going to find that there's multiple uses, and to your point, it's going to be vastly um, segmented in how it's using it, siloed in how it's using it, which is that siloing itself is antithetical to how I know you and I have talked about this before, so it's antithetical to how you and I see good synthesis models being able to be used in an organization.
Correct, absolutely correct. But there's another point I want to make to you and make sure that you and I are in sync on this and that I'm in sync with the board. And that is the uses we've both identified of these models, particularly ChatGPT, have been consistent with the way work is done right now.
Yes.
Things
Yes.
like search, things like drafting documents, things like managing a project. Well, you and I have talked in this interview process about how we both feel that the substance of work has changed. So that while going forward, we may be using these models to handle simple tasks, or maybe using certain models to handle certain tasks, we both see that the movement of these models into the corporation changes how work is done in the
Yes.
organization. It changes processes, job descriptions, how we go about even the most high level tasks, creating strategy, creating execution plan, monitoring execution, measuring success, and so forth. And this is what we mean by changing the substance of work, that when the way you do this work changes, then the substance of the work changes. Mind you, this is all using a human machine partnership where the human is leading the machine. We don't just set these machines loose on a company. And certainly the machines can't do everything that we're talking about. In fact, they can't do most of what we're talking about. The human has to do most of this work still. But I think part of the learning process going forward is going to involve figuring out how we use one of these models to augment and improve and raise the level of every single job of every single
Yes.
employee in this
Yes.
organization. You're nodding,
Yes.
so I guess you agree.
Yes, I completely agree. And what when I think about this, Deirdre, and this comes as I know you know from experience with really, really powerful use of AI models across large organizations to be able to synthesize and direct work and project management, essentially. What I see is an enormous leverage for people like you and me is the ability to take a vast set of things that generate data and independent of how they generate that data, but output that data into this, what I call an AI layer, which is a synthesis layer that itself can take and make sense of all these pieces of feeds of data into a machine that can then, through its ability to synthesize and reason, make sense of that data. So where you and I have in the past, when we saw the rise of digitization and we saw the rise of logistic systems and the era of, and I don't like this term, and I know you don't like it either, but I'll use it anyway, big data. When big data started to occur, one of the benefits of big data was that it gave us access to a lot more raw material, the source information, because prior to having that ability to digitize so much, we had to create summary systems all over the place. And we had to take estimates of what that raw material really was saying and feed those, and they became then the way that you measured the organization. And we even had systems. I built one of those, right, or helped build one, where you took summary data and summarized it at various levels and created a corporate plan like we did at IBM
Mhm.
using various systems. And the reason why we did it that way was because you didn't have the storage capability or the compute power to be able to take all the raw material and in any meaningful way create these any kind of result or run it even on a regular basis. I mean, I remember the operating plan of IBM. It took 24 hours to run it. And then we got it down to 12 hours so we could have it run from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. But it still took an enormous amount, and that's using mainframe computers back then, which I realize are like the equivalent of your and my iPhone today. Well, that may not be exactly right, but close. Um, and so we through this process of digitization, we ended up being able to deal with this raw material, this source level material. And we created logistic systems and we created data systems that had to integrate all that material into a single way of being able to look at it. So it had to be synthesized, no, sanitized and put in a similar form, which was the advent of systems like the Oracle systems, or SAP is the most famous example, which is really rigid, would everything had to fit into their process even.
Right.
So it was not just the data format, it was actually their process. It was beautiful. When it worked well, it was beautiful, and you could get real measurement results. The difficulty was getting that commonality, both in terms of process and in terms of the data being able to be valid enough to compare and use. In the advent of what you and I are now seeing, we've reached another level in that, where now we don't even anymore have to synthesize and standardize on process. And we don't have to standardize on the data format any longer because we have this layer when it's well used, this reasoning layer, what you and I are calling an AI insight layer that can make sense of that data for us. And so to me, it's no longer, we're not looking at a bunch of siloed functions in an organization that summarize, provide plans and data and fit, right? We're looking at dense sensor feeds, right? They're giving us data, whether it's plans or by the minute performance data or whatever. And we have this layer. And now, instead of focusing vertically on an organization, we can begin looking at it in a way that I think is the most powerful, which is the what you're delivering from front to back, right? And instead of having to look at it through a highly structured and neutralized system like SAP from front to back, it now doesn't need all that. So there's an element of speed, of synthesis, of being able to take data from all of these sources and make sense of them, and to do it rapidly, and to be able to even begin using it by using a standard layer like Claude, for example, or Grok, Perplexity, or Gemini. And just their raw LLM can begin the process. Now, to do it well, you need to create a Palantir-like layer that it fits into to do it well, and project management well and all that. But it still can be used. And so I look at it and just say, look, you're not going to change a company and its people and how it does things overnight, but you can come really close. And so the question that I think you and I have to ask as the two people that are trying to set the stage here for the other people that are guiding us in this path, you as CEO and me as board chair. And so you and I know this. We already know this. We've worked on these systems. We know how this works. How are we going to start this process? And I think so when I look at it, that's why I had frustrations and difficulty with the past CEO, because she was just struggling because she didn't even have the ability to describe to me in a simple term what an agent really was and how it was used. And I'm sure you have them throughout the organization. Being used is just, and it may not matter, right? If they're being managed by good people and you have a good standard system doing it. And the big issue then becomes, and I know I'm feeding you with a fire hose, Deirdre, and I realize this, and it probably feels like this to anybody that's watching this video too. I'm just getting it all out, right? I'm giving you what used to be called a core dump, um, is an issue that I was dealing with this past weekend with a buddy of mine, which is an entrepreneur from the East Coast, is the issue of security of data. right? And then you become then the security of data becomes a real point. I mean, take Claude, for example. They pushed an upgrade a few days ago and pushed 500,000 lines of their source code with it by a mistake from an insider, right? Now, so even some of the best tech firms in the world make mistakes from the inside. And the two of us, and you and I talked about this too, believed, my buddy and I, and you, who you also know, we concluded that the bulk of what he sees in the breaches of data security comes from the inside. It's not even attacks from the outside.
Mhm.
Do they exist? Yes, but it's that. So as we go through this, it's not just the use of AI in the core in the inside the company. It's how do we now protect our data at the same time as we're implementing this powerful capability. So I know I've given you a core dump fire hose here of stuff, Deirdre, and I apologize, but I couldn't have this discussion, unfortunately, with the past CEO because she, not a bad person, just was struggling because she hadn't spent enough time over the target. And by the
Mhm.
way, I think having been an operator, I have a lot of empathy for that. And I think we have a lot of CEOs out there and founders who are sitting there. If you're not already a tech founder, you're sitting in that same spot where you don't have the time. You have a company to build, and you've got to sell product, and you've got to generate revenue, and you've got to, build a quality result for your customer, an experience, and refeed that experience every day. So I have a lot of empathy for that. So that's why we're fortunate to have you in this spot. But also now we've got a company and a board that we have to bring up to a certain level to be able to work as a partner with all of us and with this leverage, this leverage that we now have. I'm going to now stop and take some coffee. I apologize for the core dump, Deirdre. I apologize.
No, perfectly all right, because these are things that you and I talked about in the interview process. And I fully agree with the concept of the AI layer. I fully agree with the concept of the use of data, the need for security, and so forth. The challenge for me as a new CEO coming into this company is, frankly, one, to do the organizational work that allows me to build that layer. You mentioned breaking down silos. Well, this is a very, very siloed company. There are going to have to be some very interesting conversations here with people. You mentioned different processes around the use of data. Well, this means massive training for everyone in the organization, as well as new processes for handling the flow of data. That's why we have the layer, because the data flows across the layer. But let me throw something else out that it also, having this layer available, changes the expectations both you and I have for every employee. No more excuses about, well, Frank wouldn't give me his data on this because the data's in the layer. No more excuses about, whoa, I didn't know that, because your use of the models will surface this from the layer. That the quality of work is going to rise in the organization, and we need to establish the cultural standards of having the expectation of the work operating at that higher layer. So I'm all in with everything you said, including the cybersecurity issues, which heaven knows are going to be multiplied once we move into this new AI world. So I know what your position is. Let me ask you, is everyone on the board aligned with you in this thinking?
No clue. And I don't mean to be flippant, Deirdre. I don't mean to be flippant. I think we have to. So this gets to a really interesting question. I think part of this upping your game is independent learning. I think that no longer, how did you, Deirdre, learn about AI from the beginning.
From messing around on the computer myself.
Right. Doing it yourself. You taught yourself. And I think that's one of the other changes. How frequently do you and I talk about a subject, and when we reach our limit of pretty assured knowledge, we stop and research? Because in the past, you and I would have to say, is this worth a trip to the library, right? Or is there somebody who we trust that might have this? We don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
How often do you, maybe it happens almost every day when you and I talk, we look something up. One of the two of us looks something up because we don't want to press beyond our real knowledge. We don't
Hmm.
have to anymore. And by the way, I have less and less tolerance. I know this is personal, but I have less and less tolerance for those who do argue beyond their knowledge because like you just said, Deirdre, you just said it. There's no excuse any longer. You don't have to guess. And so don't guess unless you have no choice. If it's about something you can't know, it's a real, then we talk about that in ahead of the machine. That's the whole ability to predict based on knowledge and judgment.
Hmm.
That's legitimate, being able to do that. But where you can know this, and a great example of this is that there was a recent event that occurred, and people were making all kinds of noise about it being improper. It's an improper use. It's an improper, it's a use of power. It's an abuse of power. What they didn't bother to check on is to see whether it had already been anticipated from its inception and a legitimate process made for doing it. And so here they are arguing about abuse of power. And hundreds of years ago, that was anticipated and built into the process where it's already been done before. So
Well,
that kind of stuff is unconscionable to me in these days, Deirdre.
you're talking about changing expectations. And now something we do from time to time. We're going to step out of character for about 2 minutes and then jump
Okay.
back into character. But stepping out of character, I think we find that our expectations about other people that we encounter are changing, just as I mentioned that expectations within the company are changing. So I believe that society is going to change the expectations about what we will tolerate in other people, that it's a become a habit of mind for people to just declaim and speak and express their opinions without doing any research. I think increasingly with the ready availability of rapid search, rapid broad search, that people are going to be able to identify, oh, that's just rhetoric, or she doesn't know what she's talking about,
Right.
or let me send them this reference here. We're going to find ourselves judging what we see in the media, what we see on social media, what we hear people say, and so forth, in a different way because we are developing a different way of responding to information because of the ready availability of information. And that ready availability is already starting to change people's expectations about how other people will act. It's my sense,
Absolutely.
for example, that some of the criticisms that I've seen of what I'll call the standard talking head news shows is increasingly critical along these same lines, perhaps not believing what the rhetoric says because you believe that someone hasn't done the research. But anyway, that's a
Well,
whole other
Deirdre,
broad
but
topic.
and back in character though, it applies to the culture of the organization.
Hmm.
And this is the point you make about raising the game, that we it that there is no longer a need for someone. You said this a minute ago. You referred to someone euphemistically as Frank, didn't give you the data. There's no more excuse for that.
Hmm.
There's just no more excuse for that. And so now, there's no excuse for Frank not providing the data, but there's also
Right.
no excuse for you not being able to at least say, it's not in the layer. It needs
Right.
to be in the layer. We need to get Frank to put it in the layer, right?
Right.
So there's a different approach to how this thing needs to work. And it's because what I think we've got to do is we can't accept anymore this the level of the, again, I may be being overly critical, right? Which I of this kind of thing, meaning I set the standard too high, and I have never been accused of that before, Deirdre. I can't imagine why somebody might accuse me today.
But the standard has to be higher,
I
Mr.
think
Board
so.
Chair.
Yeah,
Um, and if people are going to serve on a public board, they need to understand how the substance of work is already changing, given the onset of the AI models. Similarly, in my organization, now I've met all of the people on my management team, and they're all wonderful people, and I have no doubt that they're functional experts. But a functional expert is not the same as someone who knows how to use AI to enhance the performance of their responsibilities, which is what we're starting to talk about here. So I think it sounds to me as if we're starting to broach on a plan for work to be done before our next conversation. I see my work with my management team. I have two parts to this. My work with my management team is to figure out exactly what they do know and how they think about the use of AI and how they can use the models. And we may need, I know they got some training, but there may need to be some more types of training. Simultaneously, I'm going to start my conversations with all employees throughout the organization to start to get a sense of how AI is being used, what the knowledge of people is. My sense is that even though I'm guessing over 50% of the people in this organization have used one of these models, they don't know the enhanced capabilities or they don't understand how they will be expected to use the models going forward. So this is a big research project here, and also starting people on the right path because I need to know very quickly which of my senior management team members I can trust to be with me moving forward, and which unfortunately might have to be replaced. Is the same true with your board, Tom?
absolutely. Deirdre, I think what I'm hearing from you, and it's consistent with how I think about this, I think, but let's just make sure that you and I are similar in this. I think that, we have moved into an independent learning era, and the younger generation has just assumed that. And
Mhm.
certain products just assume that.
Right.
As you and I have said before, nobody gives you a user manual for this thing, right?
Correct.
They just don't. You learn to use it and you learn to use and you research to be able to find out how to use it. There's an independent responsibility on your part to do it. There's an assumed learning, an assumed independent learning. I would love to see that same approach applied to not just the organization, Deirdre, but the board. You either keep up or we're going to have to ask you to apply your knowledge elsewhere.
Right.
Because the thing that is striking me, and again, this I could be wrong about this, but I'd like to have your judgment. I think functional expertise was valued enormously in the past. And there's really good reason for that. Because that, if you think back to why did we, why did that, it mattered a lot when you're implementing SAP in your organization in all the different functions to drive the running of the business. Functional expertise was really valuable. By the way, all the way from the people that did it through the management team that use it all the way to the board making the investment decisions, which were multi-million dollar investment decisions.
Right.
Now, to me now, that's 50% of their jobs.
Hmm.
It's no longer the skill. The other skill, you know how the business works, or you know how the industry works, or you know how growing this business works.
Right.
So I think when you're on a board these days, 50% of it is a functional expertise. You understand finance, or you understand the law, or you understand marketing, or you understand how to sell, or you
Mm.
understand how to bill and scale, right? Okay, great experiences. And I'm sure I've left out some that I shouldn't have. Maybe technology is even one. But there's the other 50% is what do you do with it? How do
Right.
you build an organization and scale it?
Right.
And somebody in the company at various levels, it's about what you're looking for is not just that knowledge to make sure the sensors work right and feed the data right and all the adjustments are made, but also they understand horizontally so that they can fit it into being sure that it helps the business scale, grow and scale, right?
Right.
So anyway, I'd like your thought. Are we in sync here that we're looking at a kind of person that's going to survive this, has not only that functional skill and experience and insight to the future, Deirdre, that can predict, but also has that so functional expertise, but also has that ability to how does this thing work?
Well, I think you're describing how all of the job descriptions throughout this company, throughout the work world, are going to be changing going forward. And I
Yes.
think this is something that I have to communicate to each of my senior management team. Excellent that you're the best CFO this company ever had, but the game is changing, and we now expect you to do this. And then also encourage them to work independently, to learn independently on how to use some of these models themselves. And that's something on which we'll be assessing them. If, for example, my CMO, my chief marketing person, refuses to learn how to use a model, unfortunately, we'll need to find a new CMO.
Yes. And I hope that they're uh, they're switched on enough to realize maybe you'll be at one of the forefronts of doing this, but as they keep going, all businesses will be this way relatively soon. And they'll be lucky if they can find something of equivalent value to them if they don't develop these capabilities. And I think what I am, I'm not like, I know you share a little bit of this. I'm not convinced that all of these layoffs that are happening and are being ascribed to AI are purely because of AI. You and
Okay.
I have a theory that it has more to do with fit,
Correct.
or at
Business
least,
decisions, yes. Hmm.
yes. When you're looking, you may not be able to predict what do I need in the future, but it's probably not that
Right.
because they may be 100% functional and they'll never be anything but functional. Or maybe they don't have a high utility to begin with. And this is a really good excuse or really good reason to be able to slender down my workforce. Doesn't
Right.
mean it's going to stay that way.
Right.
So again, functional expertise, whether it be programming or technology, cybersecurity, whatever, I think that's going to be 50% of the person's job in the future. And the other 50 is going to be built around how is it used? How is it
Right.
used to be productive in whatever it is you do for a living? I could be very jaded here, Deirdre, because I've just spent the last, year deeply involved in using an AI layer to do things. And the power I see and the kind of people I see surrounding it are they look the way you and I just talked about.
Absolutely. So it sounds as if you, as board chair, and I, as CEO, have come to an agreement that we will work with the management team and your board to get them to into the use of AI models, which they do through the independent study, and we give them a period of time before we decide whether it's time for them to move on one way or the other. What time do you think? Should we ask to see progress in 1 month, 2 months?
I'll tell you what I think might be useful, Deirdre, is that in the past, you and I have looked at how work is actually done. Something we called the leadership and management model, which started out with responsibilities and then went down to strategy and talked about the operationalizing of strategy and then the doing of the work and ultimately of the measuring of the work.
Right.
And I think if what might be useful before you and I turn each other loose on our organizations is that you and I go through this at a high level and just have a little bit of common thought about how this applies. Would you like me to show you a picture of what I'm talking about?
Let's do this. You showed me
Okay.
a picture in the interview process, and I've been thinking about it.
It's that there were multiple responsibilities of someone who runs a business, and it's your first responsibility is the point two responsibility, meaning you have full responsibility for one aspect, or even as the CEO, all aspects of the business. And point two, meaning I could pick any problem in this business and I could point to the person that is the leader responsible to for that problem. And it's all about, the leader on the leader side, making sure the what, when, and why of the organization is clear. And then on the manager side, describing the details of the how, who, and who is doing what of the organization. And then moving it down to the strategic side of what is the vision, what's the mission and the strategy, and then the actual execution. And then third is what we call the micro how of the organization, down to the details of how the work is done, what the oversight, the plans, actions, and measurements are, and then how you create this adjustment process, and then the allocation of resources, which you and I would commonly call a budget, of both the strategy and then its translation into work. And then ultimately, it's the measurement of all this. And what is the OKR? Well, you and I would both say for on any organization, ultimately, it's a value equation, is the ultimate OKR. And that's part of the value exchange. What are you giving the marketplace, and are they giving you at least what you're giving them in value, if not significantly more? And what you're looking for is significantly more. And then what separates you as a for-profit versus not-for-profit is what you do with a surplus, right? Whether you distribute it to owners or you keep it for reinvestment, or if you're a not-for-profit, you use it for the fact of developing more and better services, or return it to your to the good works that you're doing. So I believe in all this, Deirdre, and one thing you and I haven't talked about, I believe because we have a different way of approaching business now with this AI layer that will influence all of these to some degree or another, we're going to change how you measure a business. Of course, we're going to still value certain cultures, like in the financial culture of what are we looking for in terms of growth and returns and so forth. But I think how we measure a business internally is going to dramatically change. And so that is also an aspect of this, is working with your team and how are we going to measure this when now we aren't inhibited any longer in certain aspects of how we look at the business. I'll stop there because I know you probably have your own comments about this.
Lots of comments. And I think, Tom, that we step out of our roles as board chair and CEO and we
Okay.
comment as Deirdre and Tom. One thing to everyone to notice is along the left side, you have the AI insight layer covering all levels of responsibility. When Tom was first drawing the AI insight layer into this model, he actually had it between the first and second responsibility. And we both looked at that and said, that doesn't accomplish everything that needs to be accomplished in the organization. And the reason for that is that when you are using these models to accomplish an organization's worth of work, you don't just sit down and use the model and then go off and do your work. In other words, it's not a one-time use. It's an ongoing interaction between the human and the machine. And it's an ongoing interaction that happens as necessary, starting from the first responsibility down to the last. And the way that I was thinking about this is when we talk about the first responsibility, this is really understanding your job. This is having your mindset so you know what your job is. You accept responsibility, you accept accountability, you know that for the leader, the work is the strategy. For the manager, the work is the execution, the operations. But it's even more than that. I define mindset as this long string of things. It's based in knowledge and understanding of the marketplace, of customers, of competitors, of the industry, of emerging technologies, of business and social factors, and of the capabilities of the organization themselves. So how does someone in these very busy days actually keep their mindset fresh? Their mindset up to date so that they can react pretty much on the spot, which is how some people, unfortunately, are finding themselves as having to react. How do they keep themselves up? Well, this is where your insight layer comes into effect, where if you use the insight layer for the leader to keep yourself up on what's happening in the marketplace and among all of your marketplace constituents, including customers and technologies and competitors and so forth. For the managers, it's using the insight layer to stay on top of what's happening within the organization. It's knowing how we get work done, who is doing this work, what these people are capable of doing, how are we accomplishing the results in the organization right now? Because all of those things likely are going to have to change. One, with the increasing onset of the AI layer, and two, with every new strategic initiative. You have to come up with a new execution plan. You have to have a way of operationalizing that, of monitoring it, and so forth. So that's how I see the AI insight layer applied there. And then going down further, we've actually spent a lot of time in series 72, 71, and then going back to some of our 60 series videos, Tom, showing people how the insight layer is used to develop a strategy and to develop the plan of execution. And we'll be talking about that more as we go through now the 73 series, which is how you as a transformational executive make all of this happen, make the AI happen within your organization. Where it really gets interesting is in using the AI layer, which is also applying to your third responsibility, where you start to use it to monitor what is happening, to set the measurements, and to do the comparison of what is happening to the metric. This is actually, by the way, since we've been talking about AI agents all along, this would be a place to bring in AI agents, to say, this is what we want to have happen, what's happening out there, and the agent is collecting the data to find out what's happening there, and then to do a comparison. Not that it goes farther. That's when the human steps in and takes over the output from the agent to decide the adjustments. What has to be done here in terms of the strategy itself, in terms of the operationalization, in terms of the work of individuals, or in terms of allocation of resources to get things back on track. And then, of course, the fourth responsibility, which is where we've taken our measurements and now we have to reverse engineer to get whatever it is correct in the organization. So the leader and the management team are going to be interacting with the AI insight layer throughout all of these levels of responsibility. And I'll also throw in here now that other people in the organization, the managers below the management team, the area supervisors, individual employees, will be carrying out their responsibilities in relation to the AI insight layer. That AI insight layer just applies throughout the organization. So it's my turn to stop, Tom, and allow you to jump in here with your many comments.
So I think what we're going to see is not just, Deirdre, that you will have the people, no matter what level, whether they be board members or the individual contributors, will be 50% functionally expert and 50% expert or knowledgeable and um, conversant in how the business functions at their various roles, right? So
Correct.
that this layer makes sense and can be and really can they can apply it in a smart way. I think the second thing we're going to see is a collapsing of the structure of the organization.
Correct.
It's not going to look like it looks today.
Right.
I doubt it's going to maintain that Germanic army structure of, the functional structure. I
Right.
think we're going to see vastly broader, uh, report twos. In other words, instead of 5 to 7 kind of thing, we're going to see tens, 20s, much more in that range as being more of the standard.
Correct.
And so you're going to collapse that distance, and they're going to be much higher level in their function in the organization as a result of that. So again, if you're looking at the future, you can see where you can even look at your organization today and see who do you think will actually survive all this and be pushing forward to, yeah, I want to do that. I want to find a way to do it. And here's the amazing thing. You and I both know there are people that do this today.
Oh, yes.
We can name people that actually function this way, this moment.
Correct.
Doesn't mean they're popular. It doesn't mean that but boy, can they get stuff done when they've
Right.
got the ingredients that you and I are talking about, and they've figured out how to make it real. And I
Correct.
just think that we're going to see a massive number of people moving in that direction. The second thing is we've seen it in the past. This is how we've seen some people operate. Hyman Rickover, when he was head of the nuclear navy, he operated this way. He had 47 direct reports, I think, was generally what he ended up having. He had a very slimmed down process for doing things, but it was a much more by hand, almost completely by hand. And he tried to stay away from automation because where it didn't need to be, because of the ability to be flexible and fast and adjust quickly. That was the theme of what he said. And he said, automation, if I'm not careful how I use it, if a structure has to be automated in a certain way, the actual process of maintaining control of a nuclear reactor for purposes of generating power for the submarines or the aircraft carriers or whatever, those needed to be automated because those had a guaranteed structure that centered around physics that didn't really vary very much, um, with human intervention in the right places.
Right.
But he avoided automation where he valued the ability of the human to step in and to deal with those things that were unknown, and where he was pushing the envelope so far with technology that he needed that. And so we've seen, and this was being done in the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? So it just tells you that it can be done and it's been done before. It's just and take the two people we're talking about, the one that's operating like that today, and then Rickover, very difficult to work with, very difficult to work for because their demands were so strong and they didn't have a lot of support activities to help people. Now, I think we can be careful in the situation you're talking about in a company to make sure we introduce this in the right way so it has an element of the appropriate change management so it doesn't create enormous chaos and
Yes.
maintains the ability to keep a business functioning at a high level, but begin seeing the advantage of it right away. I mean, in this particular case, you know, in you in the CEO role, I'd be encouraging you to start next week on using an insight layer at the top level of the business in some way to help with your leadership team.
I think that's right. By the way, I think that the younger employees will consider the whole thing a lot of fun, a lot
Hope
of
so.
good job enrichment about learning a way to build their careers going forward. With the top people, it's going to be a sorting out process. My sense is a few of them will be intrigued that if they have only thought about these AI models as an advanced search tool, they may have felt they could reject them. But once they understand the power of the layer and how it applies across all of the work that they do, some of them, I believe, are going to step up and say, yes, I'm your biggest fan. A few might not, but we need to know that quickly. And you're right, this is a way to sort it out. Same for your
And
board.
yes, well, I think one of the biggest inhibitors is that it's too easy to be lazy using these things.
Right,
It's too easy to be lazy because it will provide you answers,
right.
but to be really good, you have to use it and you have to manipulate it in a certain way and that's what the real fear is that people have developed bad habits up till now
Well,
because
that's
it
your
was
five-step
easy.
process, Tom. We're just providing the answers is at the very top of the reference, and we have set out how the human-machine partnership has to work through four additional steps to get to the output that is most useful to the organization.
So, as a shameless plug, um, this is what Ahead of the Machine book that was just published last week. This is what it's all about. How
Right,
do you use the machine in this kind of capacity to help
right,
you build a business? Right.
correct.
Um,
And
Now
the next book will get
is
even more into the
right.
topic.
It's what do you need to look like to be able to
Right,
do that job, right?
exactly.
How do you take and do things to get there? And that's going to
Right,
be leading the machine. How do you appropriately lead the machine? But
right.
incredibly fun. I mean, I had a good time writing that book. As you know, I struggled with it for a very long
Oh,
time,
yes.
but I'm not having nearly as much struggle with the next one, which is great, the follow-on one. That one is becoming more fun. People don't care. They don't care. I don't know why I'm spending time on this. The only person that probably cares is my sister. She's probably the only one that really cares beyond you and me, Deirdre.
Not so. We're hearing all sorts of things from people who have read your book and give you compliments on it. So just
Even
keep that
people who
in
are
mind.
reading it are
Yes,
testing me. And so, yes, you're all right. To be fair, yes. And by the way, it just went on sale in Amazon because the demand was high enough that they decided to put a 20% or 19% discount on it.
there you go. Yes,
Shows you that I don't control the pricing. Right?
correct.
Deirdre, uh, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom. So long for now.